Now, in case it wasn't obvious enough already, Helluva Boss is a show that takes place in hell. Helluva Boss is a show that has demons as its main characters. I know, Blitzo and Millie and Moxie and whatever are imps and not demons and blah blah blah. I really don't care. Demons, imps, tomato, it doesn't matter to me. However, something that I noticed the further I got into this season is that it seemingly doesn't matter at all that the show takes place in hell. There's an episode of the show that immediately follows this breakup that Blitzo and Stolas have, where Stolas attends one of these yearly Blitzo hate parties held by his ex. Yes, Blitzo has an ex, Verosika, I think is her name. She's like a demon pop star or something like that, I don't know. She only appears in like 3 episodes of the show and that's it. There's not really a whole lot for me to say about her as a character. I do find it kind of weird though, the fact that we have 2 characters in this show that more or less serve the same purpose. It might be redundant for me to bring this up considering the fact that Vivian Medrano, in addition to reusing character designs, also reuses character traits. As previously mentioned, Mammon and Adam from Hazbin Hotel are more or less the same character, but it still feels kind of weird to have 2 characters that are just very similar to each other in the same show, when you can instead just combine the 2 and have it be one character, a character that both represents one of the 7 deadly sins and is Blitzo's ex. And then the idea of the main character of the show at one point dating one of the 7 deadly sins could open up to some interesting ideas, but alas, that ends up not being the case at all. Anyways, Blitzo secretly attends one of these anti-Blitzo parties that Verosika holds every year. The 2 of them get into an argument about this. Verosika's like, "Oh, Blitzo, you're an awful person," and Blitzo's like, "Yeah, of course I'm an awful person. I live in hell. We all live in hell. Every one of us is an awful person." Which, you know, that is a good point, and because of that, it is naturally never brought up or acknowledged again for the rest of the argument. And it was at that very moment where I realized how unimportant it was that the show takes place in hell. The show could have taken place anywhere. It could have been a sci-fi cartoon. It could have taken place in outer space or like on an alien planet, and the main characters could all be aliens instead of demons, and almost nothing would really change. Nothing that's important at all. You could quite literally have the show take place on Earth in like a normal regular city and have the main characters all be humans, and almost nothing important would be removed by that. There's almost no reason at all to have the show take place in hell. To give Hazbin Hotel a little bit of credit, it actually felt like it was important that the show took place in hell. The show extensively focuses on Charlie trying to convince Heaven that demons can be redeemed. The show focuses on Charlie trying to convince the demons that they can be redeemed, they can go up into heaven. It actually feels important and relevant to the show's storyline. And then Helluva Boss just tells a story that just so happens to take place in hell. Very rarely is it ever important that the show takes place in hell. Very rarely does it actually matter. And I feel like there's a lot of wasted opportunities that could come from this. Maybe this was a deliberate choice to make. Maybe they wanted to keep this distinguished from Hazbin Hotel. Whatever the case may be, I find it to be yet another wasted opportunity to make it important that the show takes place in hell, to have it feel like the show takes place in hell for a reason, instead of just having it take place in hell for the sake of having it take place in hell. Again, I feel like the fact that the show takes place in hell could be a lot more relevant had the show focused on the... Yeah, you get what I'm about to say. There's no point in repeating it. I sound like a broken record at this point. Did I ever mention that all of the serious moments in this show are impossible to take seriously because this is the same show that thinks saying the F word a million times is funny? Because I just did. And now, for this next segment, we are going to enter some very, very, very risky territory. I gotta make sure not to say the wrong thing. I gotta make sure nobody gets the wrong idea from any of this. But this is something that I couldn't stop thinking about when I was watching season 2. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to talk about the LGBT representation in Helluva Boss. Now, right off the bat, I just want to say, it's not a bad thing to include LGBT representation into a cartoon. It's not a bad thing to include it into a movie. There is nothing wrong with having representation like that in your work. That is not a bad thing at all. I am not criticizing the fact that Has-Been Hotel and Helluva Boss both have LGBT representation in them. I am criticizing the way that the LGBT representation is executed. And okay, I kinda am criticizing the fact that there's LGBT representation in these shows, but not for the reasons that you think. I swear to y'all, I am not homophobic. Hear me out on this, please. Hear me out. Both Has-Been Hotel and Helluva Boss have a lot of LGBT representation in them. For the case of Helluva Boss specifically, a lot of the LGBT representation is further explored and fleshed out in Season 2. Obviously, you have the relationship between Blitzo and Stolas, but you also have the relationship between Fizzarelli and Ozzy, and the fact that Moxie is canonically bisexual. Now, it wasn't until I was fairly early on into Season 2 of Helluva Boss where I made a realization. A question popped up in my head that somehow never popped up when I initially watched and reviewed Has-Been Hotel and Helluva Boss Season 1. Why is there a lot of LGBT representation in two cartoons that take place in hell? Two cartoons that have demons and sinners and whatever as the main characters. How did Vivian Medrano think of this and not realize how tone-deaf and disrespectful it is to the LGBT community? How did she not once think about how problematic this is? Now, obviously, homophobia is unfortunately a very rampant problem, especially in the current political climate that we live in. But there's a specific brand of homophobia that is especially common, and that is Christian homophobia. Christians who believe that LGBT people are evil and sinners and they go against God, they're gonna go to hell, that sort of thing. Now, I want to make this very, very clear. Not all Christians are like this. Not all Christians are homophobic. Not all Christians have a problem with the LGBT community. There are Christians out there that support the LGBT community. There are Christians that support LGBT rights, trans rights, that sort of thing. There's probably tons of LGBT Christians out there for all I know. There's 8 billion people in the world. Anything is possible. I am not religious, so I probably shouldn't be saying this, but I want to imagine God and Jesus would be supportive of LGBT people. Isn't the whole thing with Jesus is like Jesus loves everyone? You know, why would that not include LGBT people? Why would they be exempt from that? It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. The whole thing with Jesus is to love everyone, be kind to everyone, be nice to everyone. I don't see why LGBT people wouldn't be part of that. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people who think otherwise. You have a lot of Christians who think that LGBT people go against God, go against Jesus, that sort of thing. And as a result of that, there are probably tons of LGBT people that get a sour taste whenever they think of Christianity or any religion for that matter. As I mentioned before, there are LGBT Christians out there, but there's also people that are LGBT that they have religious trauma. They have people in their family that are homophobic and Christian, and they hate on that LGBT person because they are who they want to be. They shame them, they mock them, they say that they're going to hell. They purposely exclude them from any and all family gatherings just because they commit the horrific crime of wanting to be a girl instead of a guy. And again, I feel like this sort of thing is a lot more frequent in the current political climate that we live in. I don't want this to become like overly political or anything like that, but I do have to acknowledge that things right now are really bad for LGBT people. And so I look at this cartoon that takes place in hell. I look at these two characters who are both gay for each other and are also demons at the same time, and I just think, this is in such poor f***ing taste, seriously. Like, I don't know how Vivian Medrano came up with this and didn't see anything wrong with it. How do you do something like this and you fail to see the problem with doing it? Explain that to me. Vivian Medrano created 2 cartoons. Yeah, not 1, but 2 cartoons that unintentionally reinforce a hateful, bigoted stigma against LGBT people. Emphasis on unintentionally. I am not accusing Vivian Medrano of being homophobic or anything like that. I am not accusing Vivian Medrano of being the second coming of J.K. Rowling or anything like that. Vivian Medrano is bisexual. I seriously doubt that there were any bad intentions behind including any sort of LGBT representation into these 2 shows. And yet, it just rubs me the wrong way because of the subject matter of these 2 shows, because of the setting of these 2 shows, because of the characters of these 2 shows, the species that they are. I look at something like Has Been Hotel, and something that in retrospect I should have criticized Has Been Hotel for is the fact that they never go over why a lot of these characters are in hell in the first place. Charlie, Lucifer, and Maggie get a pass for this because they actually explain Maggie's backstory. She was a fallen angel. She used to be an angel from heaven. And then Lucifer is, well, I mean, come on, he's Lucifer. And then Charlie is Lucifer's daughter, so, you know, nepotism. She gets a pass. It's fine for her. But then on the other hand, it's like, why is Alistair in hell? Why is Serpentius in hell? Why is Angel Dust in hell? What caused all of these characters to end up in hell instead of heaven? I know that Serpentius gets redeemed at the end, he ends up in heaven, but what caused him to go to hell initially in the first place? None of it is ever explained at all. Now, in all fairness, this is stuff that they could go over in season 2 of Has Been Hotel, but I don't know, man, this feels like the kind of thing that they should have explored in season 1. There are certain things that are in season 1 of Has Been Hotel that they could have just explored in season 2 instead. And then something like this, the origins as to why a lot of these characters are in hell in the first place, they could include that into season 1. I'm bringing this up in regards to Angel Dust, who is a very explicitly LGBT character, arguably the most blatantly LGBT character across either show, and he's in hell, not heaven. And they never once explain the reason why he's in hell. Yeah, I don't think Vivian Medrano really thought this one through. They could have very easily included an explanation for why this character is in hell. Even if it's just a quick throwaway line, at least it would be something. But no, there is no explanation given as to why he's in hell in none of the episodes of the show. Maybe that'll change for season 2, but this is something that they should have explored in season 1. And this wouldn't be all that concerning if it weren't for the fact that this is a very explicitly LGBT character, combined with the hateful, bigoted stigma that LGBT people have to face on a daily basis. And just like that, the unfortunate implications become a lot stronger. Granted, again, they're unintentional, but still. I would also go as far as to say that the LGBT representation in the show isn't all that well done. As I've mentioned numerous times before throughout this video, Helluva Boss primarily focuses on swearing and sex jokes for humor. Let's take some time to focus on those sex jokes. A lot of times the joke is just, haha, Blitzo is horny, Blitzo makes PP jokes, Stolas is horny, Stolas makes PP jokes. You think about Chad from that one episode I mentioned earlier, and a lot of the times the joke is that he's extremely horny for Moxie. You look at Fizzarelli and Ozzy, and a lot of the times the joke is they're horny for each other. The joke is sex. That's it. That's the joke. It almost feels like, again, I'm not accusing Vivian Medrano of anything, but it feels like Vivian Medrano looks at LGBT stuff as being like a and that's it. She doesn't look at it as a normal thing. She treats it like it's a sexual thing. Being LGBT is inherently sexual. And again, it's the same thing with Angel Dust in Has Been Hotel, where a lot of times it's just, yeah, it's funny because he's horny. It's funny because he makes PP jokes. It's funny. I think Charlie and Maggie are the only LGBT representation in either show that's actually treated like it's a normal thing. There's no unfunny, horny sex jokes relating to these two or anything like that. It's treated like a normal, healthy relationship. It doesn't have to be sexual. It doesn't have to rely on raunchy sex jokes. And yet a lot of the LGBT representation is just that. It's funny because the characters talk about PPs a lot. It's funny because they're horny. You combine this with the tone-deaf decision to have LGBT representation in a cartoon that takes place in hell, and I'm sorry, but this is not good LGBT representation. This doesn't even come close to what good LGBT representation is. It doesn't matter how good the intentions were behind including the LGBT representation in these cartoons, when number one, it is incredibly tone-deaf from a conceptual perspective, and number two, it just feels very it feels like Vivian Medrano treats it as a cheap way to make sex jokes, and so the execution of the representation is awful as well. I can't believe I've never seen anyone else criticize either of these shows for this, but you know what? I'm proud to be the first one to point this out. Someone had to point it out, and that person just so happened to be me. And now I become a lot more scared for something that could very easily happen at some point in the future. So I remember reading something that very recently there was a failed attempt to boycott Netflix amongst right-wing people, amongst Elon Musk and Twitter and that sort of thing, over this one cartoon that they have. Now, I have never heard of this show before in my entire life. I don't know anything about it. This show came out in like 2021, 2022, I don't know. It only lasted 1 or 2 seasons. It got canceled around 2022 or so, maybe 2023, I'm not sure. The point is, this show ended years ago. There are no new episodes coming out for this show. Now, even though I've never heard of this show before in my life, something that I found out about it is that it has LGBT representation in it. It is very explicitly LGBT, which, you know, that's not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with that. I gotta be real, I don't like the art style for this show. I don't think the show looks all that good visually, but that has nothing to do with the LGBT representation. You can have LGBT representation in your cartoon and also have it be visually appealing at the same time. That's entirely possible. I'm just saying. And there was like this failed attempt to boycott Netflix over this show, and apparently the creator of this show was harassed online and they got sent death threats and whatever over this whole thing, which I have to make this very clear. I do not support that at all. That is an awful thing that nobody should ever have to go through. All of this over a Netflix cartoon that ended back in like 2022 or so. A short-lived 1 season long cartoon. I watch Helluva Boss Season 2. I look at all of the tone-deaf LGBT representation in this show, and then I think about this whole recent failed Netflix boycott, and it just makes me think, Please God, let's not have right-wing people ever find out about either of these shows. Please God, I don't want Elon Musk or anything like that. I don't want Ben Shapiro to find out about either of these shows. Not only will it make things worse for LGBT people, but it will also make things worse for people who legitimately hate these two shows, like I do. People who have genuine problems with both of these shows. And so the last thing that I want in my life is for these two shows to go through the Snow White effect. Now, some of you might be wondering, what is the Snow White effect? Well, you see, the Snow White effect is when an objectively bad piece of media becomes impossible to criticize because of the loud minority of people that hate on it for the wrong reasons. This effect is named after Disney's live-action remake of Snow White, which, by all accounts, is a horrible movie, one of the worst movies of 2025 easily, and yet it is very hard, if not near damn impossible, to call it that because of the large amount of people that hate the movie for the wrong reasons. If you plan on making a negative review of this movie and you have actual valid reasons as to why you don't like the movie, instead of just, oh, girl said she doesn't like old movie, how dare she, f***ing woke DEI propaganda. Like, if you have actually good reasons to say that the movie is bad, be careful, because by making a negative review of the Snow White remake, you run the risk of either attracting people that also hate the movie, except they hate it for anti-woke reasons, or people that will assume that you are anti-woke yourself just because you don't like the movie, just because you think the movie is bad. And then you have the inverse, an objectively good piece of media that is impossible to praise because of the loud minority of people that love it for the wrong reasons. I call that the Fight Club effect. One of the best movies ever made, and it is hard for me to call it that because of the large amount of people that think Tyler Durden is the good guy. Anyways, I'm getting way off topic, I apologize. I honest to God hope that none of this happens to Has-Been Hotel or Helluva Boss. I don't want either of these shows to become objectively bad cartoons that are impossible to criticize. I don't want anti-woke grifters to find out about these shows. I don't want Elon Musk or Ben Shapiro or whatever to find out about these shows. I don't want right-wingers to find out about these shows, because I know that they're going to make criticizing both of these objectively terrible cartoons much harder than it needs to be. These people are going to look at the fact that these two shows take place in hell and they have LGBT representation in them despite that, and they're going to use that as proof. They're going to use that as ammunition for the whole LGBT people are evil and satanic bullcrap that is not true at all. Again, not only will it make things even worse for LGBT people, but it will also make things even worse for people who legitimately hate both of these shows. All of a sudden, you're going to start getting more and more people who will try and defend these two objectively badly written cartoons just to spite these people. And it's like, you do realize you can spite and make fun of the right-wing anti-woke grifters without simultaneously defending the objectively dog shit media. You do realize that, right? You do realize that. I'm telling y'all, as much as I hate to admit it, it is practically inevitable. The anti-woke right-wing grifters and whatever, Elon Musk, Ben Shapiro, eventually they're gonna find out about both of these shows, and they're gonna get their panties in a twist about the fact that, like, oh, there's LGBT representation in these two cartoons that take place in hell. And then there's just like a million different things that are gonna happen as a result of that. The second most annoying people in the world, the most annoying being the right-wing anti-woke grifters, characters. The second most annoying people in the world are going to try and defend both of these objectively terrible cartoons just to spite the anti-woke weirdos. Even though you can simultaneously hate the anti-woke weirdos and also hate the objectively bad media as well at the same time. You get nothing out of defending Helluva Boss just because right-wing people hate it. I promise you that. You can hate both at the same time. The hateful stigma of, oh, LGBT people are satanic, it's gonna become much bigger. Things are gonna escalate further. Things will get so much worse for LGBT people. And hopefully, there will be a few people, including Vivian Medrano herself, that'll open up their eyes and realize, you know, maybe it was actually kind of a bad idea to include LGBT representation in two cartoons that take place in hell. Maybe it was a bad idea to have an explicitly LGBT character like Angel Dust in hell. Maybe it was a bad idea to not have any LGBT characters in heaven. And that's something I gotta bring up as well. There's like 3 main characters that are in heaven. There's Adam, I think there's like 2 girls as well, I don't know. And like none of them are LGBT as far as I'm aware. And then you have like the 4th guy who's voiced by the Fall Out Boy singer that they're going to introduce him in season 2. And he's probably not going to be LGBT either. Seemingly none of the heaven characters are LGBT, which only makes this even more suspicious looking. Is it really that hard to create a transgender angel? Is it really that hard to do that? Is it really that hard to create a non-binary angel? Do they have to be represented by the demons and not the angels? I'm not looking forward to when anti-woke people find out about either of these shows. I'm not looking forward to it at all. I know that it's going to be a complete and utter disaster. Let's say Ben Shapiro finds out about Has-Been Hotel shortly after it came out at the beginning of 2024, and he makes a video calling it woke and whatever, saying that it further shows that LGBT people are satanic, that sort of thing. And then I end up making my search for the worst cartoon on Has-Been Hotel several months later. I will become a lot more nervous, a lot more scared to make this video, because I know that this video will either attract anti-woke people who hate the show for homophobic reasons, or people that will assume that I'm homophobic because I think this show is unfunny and poorly written, neither of which have anything to do with the LGBT representation in the show, by the way. And I cannot let that happen. Under no circumstances will I let this become something that's impossible to criticize. I shouldn't have to silence myself from reviewing bad media just because of a loud minority of annoying people online. God, this is something that I've been thinking about nonstop recently. I just can't stop thinking about how like some idiot in 2016 was like, hey, let's make a Ghostbusters movie where they're all women just for and giggles, just because, you know, why not? And then unintentionally with this movie, it ends up ruining media criticism as we know it. All of a sudden now, you have people complaining about wokeness and DEI and all this other non-existent crap. No longer are you able to just normally criticize a movie. And it pisses me off to no end. And from what I've heard, Ghostbusters 2016 is a legitimately pretty bad movie, and it has nothing to do with the fact that they're women. I've heard it is a genuinely bad movie. However, if I ever made a negative review of it, I will either attract anti-woke people that hate the movie for misogynistic reasons, or people that think that I'm misogynistic just because I criticize the movie. And so the simple solution would be to not review any of this stuff, but that's pretty hard for me to do, given the fact that I'm a reviewer, and given the very strong hatred that I feel towards these two objectively bad cartoons. And I refuse to keep the hatred that I feel for these two shows silent. I refuse to keep it all to myself. The moral of the story is, when you make a cartoon that takes place in hell and it has demons and sinners and whatever as the main characters, don't include LGBT representation into that cartoon, regardless of the intentions behind including the LGBT representation, and regardless of the execution of the LGBT representation itself. It's still in very poor taste. It is still extremely tone deaf, and you will unintentionally be making the lives of LGBT people worse by doing so. And if the cartoon ends up being bad for reasons that have nothing to do with the LGBT representation, then you're just making the show even harder to criticize than it should be, because the LGBT representation could be used as an easy get out of jail free card, making your show immune and exempt to all criticism, so that if anyone criticizes your show for having bad writing or unfunny, immature humor, some idiot could be like, oh, you hate it because you're homophobic, you hate it because there's LGBT representation, you probably watch Ben Shapiro, you homophobic bigot. You know, it's like, nobody wants that to happen. Nobody wants that to happen. If you want to include LGBT representation into a cartoon, that's fine, but don't do it for a cartoon that takes place in hell. I don't know how Vivian Medrano never once put two and two together to realize how tone deaf and problematic this is. And there are ways to keep the LGBT representation in both of these shows without having it be problematic or tone deaf. Give these characters backstories as to why they ended up in hell in the first place, especially for Angel Dust, arguably the most explicitly LGBT character in either show. Because when you have this blatantly LGBT character in hell and not heaven, and the show never explains why he ended up in hell and not heaven, yeah, that can raise some very unfortunate implications. Unfortunate implications that could be easily prevented if the show explained why he's in hell and not in heaven. Alternatively, they could just add LGBT characters into heaven in addition to hell. Again, there's only like 3 to 4 main characters for heaven in Has-Been Hotel, and none of them are LGBT. It cannot be that hard to create a new character, an angel in heaven that's transgender as well. That cannot be hard to do at all. That's literally like, that should be the easiest thing ever to do. If you could do it for the demons in hell, you could also do it for the angels in heaven. It cannot be that hard. You include a few LGBT characters into heaven, and boom, all of a sudden this becomes a lot less tone deaf and problematic. It's literally as simple as that. Just put a couple transgender angels into heaven. It's not that hard. There are ways to prevent the LGBT representation in either of these shows from coming off as tone deaf or problematic without going the extreme route and removing all of the LGBT representation, making every character straight. There are ways that you can keep the LGBT representation and not have it feel disrespectful. But unfortunately, for whatever reason, neither of these shows do that, and I don't know why. They just don't, and it pisses me off.